Oh, what 365 days can do to those who predict the future. Here's what Macleans Magazine had for its 2025 predictions of the year. Its number one prediction, Poilievre will kill the capital gains tax. Well, we know how that went. Hello and welcome to Unpublished TV. I'm Ed Hand. There's a danger to credibility when you attempt to make those forecasts. Of course, no one saw what was coming. Trudeau resigned. Carney took the helm of the Liberals, and Poilievre was on the outside looking in. Just one of the surprises that took us by surprise. Our Unpublished.vote poll question asks, who will have the biggest impact on Canada in 2026? Mark Carney, Pierre Poilievre, Donald Trump, or other? You can log on and vote right now. Vote, email your MP, and share your thoughts on unpublished.ca. Coming up on the show, we'll discuss that and many other surprises, and not so surprising, with our Unpublished TV panel. Elliot Tepper's with the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. Canseco is the president of Research Co. in BC, and Garry Keller, vice president of Strategy Corp. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Let's start with you, Elliot. From your perspective, who had the biggest impact on Canada in 2025 through the foreign policy lens?
Well, the foreign policy lens provides us either micro views or very, very tall from outer space, looking backwards at what's going to be the big stories. So I think the big story, which does impact Canada, is the fact that this was the year of the great leap forward for China. They are going to be the ultimate winners of everything we see around us, and that certainly has an impact on Canada. Xi Jinping has made his position on Canada very clear. I'll leave perhaps to my colleagues more details on that, but Terry Glavin has just summarized Charles Burton's new book as, I think, accurately saying China is a predator nation, and it's time that Canada woke up to that fact, came to grips with it, and we are very tempted, I think, to say, well, if the U.S. is no longer reliable, we'll just jump in and sign up with China. There's a lot of red flags against that.
What do you think, Garry, in looking at the situation with China? Do you see that being the big issue for Canada in 2026?
Well, it's been an ongoing issue for many, many years, Canada's relationship with China, and it has gone hot, it has gone cold, based on a number of factors, whether it is our domestic policies or whether it is when, Xi Jinping became the head of China, his crackdown on human rights, and all those issues. So, China will continue to be an issue. We, of course, had the Foreign Interference Commission that looked into these issues here in Canada. And there's been accusations the government has been dragging its feet on implementing that foreign issues registry. So that will continue to be an issue for Canadians going forward. But as Canada tries to find different markets, it's going to be a challenging year. We've seen a thawing of our relationship with India. We've seen the Prime Minister do a bunch of foreign travel into other places like the United Arab Emirates, and planning trips to Saudi Arabia and other places. So Canada is looking for other markets to help buffet the issues that we have going on with the United States.
What's your view on that, Mario?
Well, we've seen the numbers in the way Canadians perceive other nations really shifting over the past few years. When we were at the height of the Meng Wanzhou situation and the Huawei deal, China was practically in single digits. Now it's getting closer to 26, 27%. The one nation that has dropped dramatically in the eyes of Canadians is the United States. The numbers were significantly higher during the Biden years. After Donald Trump got elected, it started to drop. After Donald Trump said that he wanted to make Canada the 51st state, it dropped even further. So it's a complexity in the way Canadians are relating to the world, and the difficulties in figuring out where we emerge from this. If we embrace China as a place where we can do business, given all the complexities that we have geographically, or do we just wait it out? There will be a future after Donald Trump. There might be a new Democratic president at some point where we can figure out if we can go back to the way things were in the 80s and 90s. But it's been a very complex situation for Canadians who are now looking at Europe as the place where we could do more business and places that we should be Essentially closer to.
Elliot, Mario brings up a good point about the U.S. and obviously its views in the eyes of Canadians is dwindling. What do you expect from the Canada-U.S. relationship going forward into 2026?
Are you directing that at me?
Yep.
Or, yes, the whole panel. Well, obviously, Donald Trump is the key factor in terms of affecting how Canada behaves in the world and its security and economic maturity at home. Donald Trump will remain a disruptive influence. Predicting what Donald Trump will do is fruitless, as we know. The probability does exist that Donald Trump will, at some point, want to, as he's just said in his newly published national, they've just published in the U.S. a national security outlook, and the northern hemisphere, the whole hemisphere belongs to the U.S. That's going to factor in. A key date to watch for is coming up quite quickly. The renegotiation of what I call the new NAFTA starts in January, I believe. We have a new ambassador in the U.S. to help carry the lead on that. So undoubtedly, Donald Trump is the number one factor at home and around the world as to how things are going to evolve in the year 2026.
Garry, do you feel the same way?
It is a massive impact, and I'm sure Mario can bear this out with some of the polling he's done. But some people have asked, well, why has Mark Carney seemed to have had such a honeymoon with voters in a lot of ways that are giving him a lot of credit or a lot of leeway in negotiating with Donald Trump? And I think for the large part, Canadians feel and believe that, negotiating with Donald Trump's like trying to nail Jello to the wall, right? So I think there's a lot of a leeway that Mr. Carney is getting, and you can debate his progress to date and his success to date. And I think that's a fair question. And I think Canadians can ask that and will be asking that question. But yes, of course, Mr. Trump and his policies and how he has impacted the Canada-U.S. relationship, especially on the trade side, has been a massive, massive impact. And in 2026, obviously, there is a risk to the future of CUSMA, the revised NAFTA, that it's under review, and a Donald Trump could come along and just say, I'm completely pulling out of this thing, holus bolus. And so I think Canadians have to be on guard for that, as well as possibly the United States and Mexico doing a side deal. That's always a risk. So lots of uncertainty and challenges ahead for the Canada-U.S. relationship coming forward in 2026.
Yeah, Mario, Donald Trump called April 2nd, 2025 Liberation Day. That's when all the tariffs started fanning out everywhere. And obviously it wasn't great for Canada and the U.S. Was that the first part of where the U.S., in the eyes of Canadians, was on the decline, or was it perhaps before that?
I would say it started a little bit before that, because what we saw was a significant proportion of conservative voters, roughly around 35-40%, who said, I actually like Donald Trump. I think when we look at some of the ideas, when we look at the way he's handling his business and what he wants to do with the federal government, this is somebody who I respect. All of that was gone after the 51st state comments. His favorability rating among conservatives drops to the teens. So it starts a little bit earlier, but I think when we get down to it, it was the timing of the federal campaign that really helped Mark Carney. The fact that we were discussing Donald Trump consistently, the fact that people were telling us that they really trusted Mark Carney more to deal with Donald Trump than Pierre Poilievre. And, it really threw a wrench into the machine for those of us who look at this from the standpoint of research. When we had people who had voted in Quebec, for instance, consistently for the Bloc for the past 3 elections, suddenly telling us that they were liberals. NDP voters in urban areas with long-standing incumbents telling us, this year I'm a liberal. So without that timing, it would have been very difficult for Mark Carney to win that election. But it also makes it more complicated to look at Donald Trump. I find myself in a situation where I ask Canadians about something on Monday and Tuesday, And then on Wednesday, Donald Trump says something ridiculous that is going to make it will render my findings useless for the next week. So it's been a tough time because of everything that is happening and the way in which Canadians are relating to Donald Trump and what is happening in the U.S. At a higher rate than ever.
I would hazard the guess that I'd say the biggest event in Canada in 2025 was obviously the federal election. Justin Trudeau resigning, and then Mark Carney coming in and winning that close, really close leadership race. You know, he won with 85% plus to win the Liberal leadership. When Poilievre won on the first ballot in 2022, it was only 68%. Elliot, what's that tell you?
Once again, that Donald Trump is a dominant factor in Canada's fate and future. I'd like to preface that by saying something we have to internalize, even though we want to diversify our trade and plan to do so by a certain percent in a few years. The United States will always be our number one trading partner and our number one North American security perimeter partner. There will always be a common perimeter. In terms of the impact on Canada, I believe the U.S. is shocked by the fact that Canada is shocked, and there will, I would leave it up to our specialist on what happens in January for Pierre Poilievre's review, but I note with interest that there doesn't seem to be anybody opposing him, and the old maximum politics is you can't beat somebody with nobody, and Pierre is a somebody at the minute for sure, although I live right next to his riding, and he lost that riding, and he lost 27-point lead. And that's entirely due to Donald Trump and also the skill of the Liberals in winning elections. They're very good at that.
Okay, I'll buy a bit of that, but I would say it in terms of Mr. Poilievre losing the Carleton riding, you could see, anybody on the ground could see things were going to be shifting with the way people were moving in there. Garry, I'm wondering if maybe the Conservative Party sort of overestimated their power.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of overestimating power. I think that, you know, the crux of the campaign question, as Mario pointed out too, was this election became who is the best able to deal with Donald Trump. And I remember having conversations with Conservative MPs and candidates prior to the election campaign while the provincial election campaign was going on in Ontario. And they were telling me how excited they were that this was going to be a carbon tax election. I said, I got to break it to you. I don't think this is going to be a carbon tax election. I happened to be in Toronto that day, and I said it's the first week of the provincial campaign, and Doug Ford is crushing his opposition on two platform planks: Canada is not for sale and never the 51st state. And the reaction to that was, yeah, that's Ontario. But you know, this is going to be a carbon tax election. And they, you know, the general strategy, and I can speak from experience because I was a Conservative candidate in this most recent election. And, I certainly felt that at the doors and it panned out during the campaign, where the first 3 weeks of the campaign was all about Donald Trump, elbows up, Mark Carney. And then the last 10 days of the campaign, it shifted because Trump wasn't talking about Canada anymore. So it became about affordability, cost of living. Can my kid find a place to live, buy a house, those sorts of issues. And we saw that bear out in the election results. In my case, I won the vote on election day, but I lost the advance poll and I lost the special ballot. And when I talked to candidates and MPs across the country, I said, how did you do in the advance poll and the special ballot? Many of them said, I either did worse than the last time, or I lost it, or in fact, I got crushed in it, but I was able to save my seat because the issues turned on election day. And so I think that was the crux of the election there. You know, Mr. Poilievre in Carleton, there's an extra factor there because as a leader of the opposition, you have to be out across the country. You can't be back at home. And give credit to Bruce Fanjoy, who defeated Mr. Poilievre. He worked that riding very hard for 2.5 years, doing the groundwork. And I think a combination of all those factors led to what happened in Carleton.
Mario, I'm wondering if Mr. Poilievre does have a leadership review coming up early in the new year. Do you expect it'll be not a problem? He'll just move forward, or do you think there's going to be some some changes. A 40-point lead to evaporate going into an election campaign is pretty substantial.
Well, I think there's been a little bit of movement to that effect. There will be a new campaign manager if and when the next campaign happens. I think there's been a significant emphasis in trying to sell Pierre Poilievre in the same way that we saw him back in 2024. I would argue that the best year a politician ever had in this century in Canada was Poilievre in 2024. Unfortunately for him, 6 days into 2025, Trudeau decides to walk away and then makes things more complicated. I think there's a complexity in trying to sell the new ideas of the Conservatives because of Trump and because of how much he's dominating the room. But we saw it particularly here in BC, where at the end of 2024, we had practically a majority of people telling us that they were going to vote for the Conservatives. No party has had that level of support since the Canadian Alliance in 2000 under Stockwell Day. That's how far we have to go to see BC really coalescing around somebody. But all of that was lost in the next 4 months. Partly because of Mark Carney's campaign and the way in which the Liberals tried to talk to things. But those votes are borrowed. You look at the elections federally here in BC, and there's only been 3 times where the Liberals finished in first place. Trudeau-mania 1 in 1968, Trudeau-mania 2 in 2015, and this year's election in 2025. So a lot of those voters who were scared of Trump, who voted for the Liberals, maybe they were Conservative, maybe they were NDPers, might look at Pierre Poilievre differently in the next 6 months and say, maybe we made a mistake.
Elliot, we've been talking an awful lot about Donald Trump. Obviously, it's one of the prime players that we've seen through the year. I think back to early in 2025, that Trump-Zelensky outburst in the White House. And here we are, the man who said he was going to solve that war in 24 hours. And, that whole year has gone by now and nothing's changed. When Donald Trump gets out on the international scene, things don't seem to get done very well, do they?
Well, it's rather a mixed picture. He has some real triumphs, I think. But let's go to the Ukrainian issue since you raised it, Ed. If I were to nominate Hero of the Year, it would be the people of Ukraine. They, at the end of 2025, despite everything that's happened to them, and a lot has happened to them, Russia has thrown everything they've got at them. The Ukrainian people are standing. The last figure I saw, I was just poking around on this, at the current rate of Russian success in conquering territory, it would take 145 years for them to take all of Ukraine, and then they would be facing a guerrilla warfare and an insurgency. The Russians are now asking at the table to be given what they can't win on the battlefield. The reality is for Ukraine, and I would broaden this out since this is end of year and, what's it all mean? If you broaden it all out, the return of history that happened when Ukraine suddenly was invaded by a neighbor to change its borders really ended the 80-year peace and the 80-year understanding and the foundations of the United Nations that you do not change national borders or territorial integrity by force. Now that is happening. And I think one of the big stories of the 2025 year is the success of Ukraine in changing the battlefield equation, and also standing back just a little bit farther from that, the fact that we have lost our 80-year peace and the fact that we are now entering into a new world order whose borders are not yet, the parameters are not yet set.
Garry, how do you see Donald Trump? Obviously we were talking about Ukraine, but it seems every time we turn around, there's another war he's solving or not solving. Now they've seized a tanker off Venezuela. At what point is this gonna, the international insurgency that the U.S. seems to be doing, when is that going to end up biting them in the back?
Well, I think in some ways it has bit them in the back in relationships with former friendly allies or allies who now are questioning whether or not they can trust the United States. And I think the latest manifestation of that is the national security strategy that was published last week, where a lot of people are asking. This feels very much like Monroe Doctrine 2.0, where, as Elliot pointed out, the entire hemisphere is our backyard, and our allies our traditional allies are completely untrustworthy, and they've got to pay up in a lot of ways. It's what we've heard for many years. And how does Mr. Trump and his acolytes deal with that in 2026? I think that remains to be seen. To give what Elliot said, yes, there have been some successes for Mr. Trump, but it is a very haphazard way of engaging in foreign policy and defense policy. And I think it just has all it has done is to reinforce the fact that the United States increasingly is seen as an untrustworthy partner, an untrustworthy ally, and that countries have to really focus in the near term on their interests, what drives them, and what protections they need against an unpredictable United States of America.
Yeah, and unpredictable is a great description. Mario, where do you see this going in 2026?
I think a lot of it, when it comes to foreign affairs in the Trump administration, is going to have to rely very heavily on the way the MAGA base supports what he's trying to do. It's not a base that is particularly geared towards understanding global affairs. But still, it's a group that is going to react very positively to some things that Donald Trump does. And I think the best example for me of how much the Republican base has changed is we go back to the 2012 primaries, and Texas Governor Rick Perry is the first one to float the idea of invading Mexico to deal with the cartels. Maybe we should be using our military to deal with the cartels. And the Republicans react very, very negatively to it. What are you talking about? These are our friends. We have a deal with these people. These are our neighbors. And here we are just a decade and a half later. And now it's the MAGA base that is saying, yes, let's go into Mexico and do whatever we want. So it's a complicated aspect of this. But it also has to do with the way in which he's trying to relate to that base. He wasn't somebody to talk during the campaign about solving any war. And now he's mentioning Azerbaijan every couple of speeches.
There's a number of issues that many aren't talking about, but they will raise their heads quite dramatically in the next few years. The declining birth rate right around the world, Canada, obviously, the U.S. Mario, you obviously are a numbers guy. Where is this going to take us? And are people paying attention?
What I've seen when I ask about immigration in Canada is a significant level of support for the concept of the melting pot. And this is quite remarkable for a country that has been based on the concept of the mosaic. Come in here, you don't need to integrate, we will respect your own culture, you'll do your own thing. But for the past couple of years, the needle has been moving more towards the mosaic. And I think there's a sense from some Canadians that people aren't assimilating as much as they used to, or that things aren't going to be easier in the same way they were back in the 70s or 80s when the policies were still very new. This is ultimately something that is very complicated to campaign on. And I think we can see this in the debacle that the People's Party campaigns have been over the past 3 elections. They haven't elected anybody. They get their best level of support during the pandemic election when everybody's upset and there's a lot of conspiracy theories. But they went back to probably 1.5 points in most of the ridings that they ran on in the last election. So immigration is a very delicate issue. You can't really run a campaign saying to people that the country is closed, because when you do that, you wind up like Maxime Bernier, running 3 times and getting nothing out of it.
I find that interesting. More to the melting pot and not the mosaic, as well, basically as we grew up. Elliot, in terms of immigration, and we've been talking about the declining birth rate, where do you see this impacting Canada in 2026?
In particular, Canada. Well, the bigger picture is that the world is in an interesting situation where there's declining birth rates, but there's other parts of the world that have very active birth rates. And when that happens, inevitably people are going to move. And when people are going to move, then we have to decide on what terms. And so far, Canada has been, I think, quite successful in saying, we'll set the terms, we will let in people, we'll have an expansive immigration program, but you have to come in under the kind of guidelines that we set. And it's, I think, been remarkably successful given the fact that I've done a fair bit of work on the demographic side on this. So, but the main fact is that Canada continues to be a welcoming beacon in an ever darkening world. But Canada has to also be alert to the fact that we do have a declining birth rate on our own. Any growth in Canada will rely on newcomers, economic growth, not just population growth. The population growth is related to the economic growth. Almost all the new businesses in Canada come from newcomers, et cetera. In terms of multiculturalism and the mosaic, I've been deep into that debate. The multiculturalism program was always intended to be a unifier, not a divider. It was, you don't have to disappear into either one of two founding nations. You can be who you are and be Canadian. And I think that really unlocked the growth of Canada because we were in a sterile debate for a long period of time, handcuffed basically in growth. And that's allowed the kind of progressive, positive kind of society we have evolved into as a result.
Garry, we've been talking about the declining birth rate and immigration. Obviously, the numbers declining here in Canada. And we talk an awful lot about affordability, new generations, Generation Z, millennials, a lot of people don't seem to understand it. Where do you see they play into this role? You know, not being able to afford, but still not being able to have children start families for 2026.
Yeah, and I think that has been part of the big discussion around immigration, around a whole suite of other policies. You know, first off, on the issue of trying to address the declining birth rate, you know, many countries in the Western world have tried all sorts of different programs to help increase the birth rate, whether it's financial supports or whatever you have it, and none of them have worked. And so when people come along and say, well, we just need to bring back the baby bonus or something like that, that is not going to address that. You know, society has changed in many ways, and there's a number of factors for the declining birth rate. But as a result, we have seen this increase in immigration. And I think prior to 2015, we had a general consensus in this country about the net benefit of immigration, a strong mix of economic immigration and family reunification, with economics, immigration tending to be the more driving factor. 2015, the Trudeau Liberals started to break that consensus in my view. They changed the policies. They overemphasized family reunification to economic immigration. And then we saw the numbers just skyrocket from, 2019, 2020, notwithstanding the pandemic, 2021 onwards. The full impact of temporary foreign workers. And that has created these cleavages in society where, again, having been a candidate on the recent campaign, the number of people who, especially young people, and this is where Pierre Poilievre's real base of support is, the number of young people who are saying, I can't afford a house. I'm never going to be able to afford a house. The government needs to do something to do this. And this is the challenge that the Liberals have gotten themselves in, and they reversed their policies on temporary foreign workers, not reversed them totally, but they've made changes to the immigration system because they had such negative impacts to this country. And so this is going to continue to be an issue going forward. And we talk about housing policy plays into this, but mass numbers of immigration have impacts on the healthcare system, on the education system, on the post-secondary system. And these have all led to this situation where affordability has gotten out of control.
All right, let's just quickly go around the horn here. What or who do you see as the biggest threat to peace in 2026, Elliot?
Oh, that's a complicated question. I'm not going to say Donald Trump, as tempting as it is. I would focus on Iran. We have a window at the moment, where Iran has lost its big bet. It could derail the in the eternal competition in that region for regional dominance, the competition between Turks and Persians and Arabs, now with Israel joining in, that eternal competition, Iran intervened decisively by derailing the Saudi initiatives. They won, but then they've lost. And this window is very, in a shifting Middle East, containing the Iranian threat, as long as this regime, I don't want to say Iran, it's the regime, not the people of Iran. Canada has no problems with the people of Iran and vice versa. There's a long history there. But the fact is that Iran is a negative factor in terms of peace in the world, certainly peace in the region, but they act internationally. And I'm concerned that not enough attention is being focused on closing the window of opportunity for Iran to recoup.
All right, Garry, who or what do you see as the biggest threat to peace for 2026?
Well, I think it remains Vladimir Putin. I mean, Putin's invasion of Ukraine is immoral and a horrible invasion of Ukraine, which has killed thousands and thousands of innocent Ukrainians, children, young people, adults. It's continuing to be, and it has impacted how the globe has reacted to this in a number of ways, not just from a defense perspective and the defense of Europe, but economically. Things as much as how agriculture works with, Ukrainian grain shipments delayed and how that has impacted places like Egypt with imports of grain and being able to sell bread on the streets. I think these have all had impacts over the last 3 years. And until there's some sort of settlement and there is actual peace in and around Ukraine, Vladimir Putin remains the biggest threat to peace in 2026.
And Mario? Who or what do you see as the threat?
I agree with Elliot and Garry, and I'm not going to say Donald Trump, but I think the main thing that we need to focus on is who is going to stand up to these problems, who will be there to deal with Iran, who will be there to deal with Putin. We see Emmanuel Macron having very low ratings in France. We don't know what's going to happen in the next election there. We see the rise of the Reform Party in the United Kingdom at levels that a third party has never had. So it's ultimately also in the hands of the voters. Who are you going to put in a position to deal with some of the things that we need to figure out? And I'd say secondarily, it's a year of election in the United States as well. We've seen all the discussions about gerrymandering and the way in which they want to reshape the House. It's going to be difficult for the Republicans to hold on to their majority. I think the Senate majority is certainly safe. The seats that they're defending are not going to be that complicated. But it might essentially push Donald Trump into a corner. If he no longer has a majority in the House of Representatives, he could be even more unhinged.
Well, viewers, you can weigh in as well. Our Unpublished.vote poll question asks, who will have the biggest impact on Canada in 2026? Mark Carney, Pierre Poilievre, Donald Trump, or other. You can log on and vote right now. Vote, email your MP, and share your thoughts on unpublished.ca. I want to thank our guests on the show today, Elliot Tepper with the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs. Mario Canseco is the president at Research Co. And Garry Keller is the vice president of Strategy Corp. And I want to thank you for watching Unpublished TV. I'm Ed Hand.